everyone. Sorry for the reception, right? So basically, what we did is in the TCP IP stack, we combined multiple layers, and then now all of them. So because we were trying to practically implement the OSI model, right? And there were uh, different types of layers that we had. So what we did is, since those layers were not practically being used, although theoretically they are still there, but that is not how the modern internet works. What we did is we combined those multiple layers into single layers, and then instead of having a 7-layer stack, now we have a 4-layer stack, basically called as the TCP IP stack, right? So basically, the client is going to send request to the server, right? This is the client, and the client is going to send request. Oh, just give me 1 minute. Yeah, so the client is going to send the request to the server, right? Now, uh, how it works is the server is something basically that is going to provide you a service, right? It is like a when you go in a restaurant, right? You have different waiters working, and all those are going to serve you your dishes, right? So on similar lines, you have the client and server. The server is going to serve you your request, right? So basically, it is going to serve three main files. One is JS file, one is CSS, and then the other is HTML, right? All of this is going to be in an HTTP format that is going to be returned, because when we go with www, we are basically saying that we are doing HTTP transfer, right? So first is you go and enter a website name, right? So remember, these are all computers, right? They do not understand names, right? They only can understand numbers. So should be some mechanism by which you can get the get the address, or get a number assigned for the server, right? So then what happens is you do a DNS lookup, right? Now from the DNS as well, you start breaking down the website from the root directory, right? So generally a website will be like google.com, right? Now if you notice this website, there are two parts to it, right? One is this .com part, and the other is the name of the website, right? The .com basically means that this is from the .com root level directory, and then this is the name of the website, right? So once that is being searched, so a specific IP address will be present here in the DNS. Now this IP address is then returned back to our browser. Now once we have the IP address, now we are going to search by the IP address, and then once we have the server in place, then we are going to establish a TCP IP connection, right? Once that connection is established, then we are going to send an HTTP request to the server, right? Now, in response, the server will respond with different types of files, right? All those will be in HTML or hypertext language, because www will be basically refer that we are going to do some sort of hypertext or HTML transfer back. Now once this is done, once the connection is established, then we are going to send the data, right? Now what could now there are many possible things that could go wrong, right? What if this HTTP request is not sent by the client, but instead in this place we have some imposter sitting around who is able to monitor this request, and instead of the client sending it, the hacker or the imposter sends it to the server, right? Now server does not know, right, like who the client or which client is going to request. What it is going to do is it is just going to serve service the hacker as well and return the data back. So then again, yeah, what if this person gets access of some important information like password or something, like to log in into the system, right? So instead of the original person coming in, an imposter has come. So this is basically where the system is vulnerable to hacking, right? Now the other thing that could happen is, remember, this server is basically a processor, right? Or basically a server is a computer which is set up in the center to serve the request, right? So remember, this server will also has some capabilities of its own, right? Depending upon the processor used, depending upon the RAM present in it, this will also have some sort of capacity, right? Now the problem with this is, what if we send multiple requests, right? Like what if we send thousands of requests for to the server. Now again, what is this going to do is, now it is going to take some time for the servers to process, or if the number of requests are considerably large, then what is going to happen is, this server is going to fail, right? I mean, it wouldn't be able to service all of the requests, and it might fail. So again, we have added a vulnerability to a server, right? That the server can also go down if the number of requests are considerably high. So these are basically all. There are multiple possible cases as well where we can have information being lost, right? And so there is a need for us to securely provide, or to secure, or to achieve authentication in some some kind of form, or in some another way, so that we can prevent such scenarios, right? Now this is what is my client server model, right? This is also called as the model view model, right? Or MVVM. This is how our internet looks like, right? You do not request the server which has a logic. Instead, you have an API that is this view using to which you can access. Now so basically, now why should we so there are different mechanisms, right? Different places where our server, or there are possible different chances where the hacker may come in and uh, uh, may will try to copy a request, and may which is basically leading to a vulnerability issue, right? So now we are dealing with those issues which can happen on the client side, right? Or which can be done only on the client side and not on the server side. So uh, again, uh, now we are going. So basically, what we have done is we have categorized our authentication into two things. One is a client-based authentication, and another is a server-based authentication. Now, when we say a client-based authentication, is basically the the goal of this is basically to identify that the user is not, for example, in this case, right? Instead of the user sending the HTTP request, an imposter sitting in between comes in and sends in the request, right? This may lead to a vulnerability issue, right? We don't want this to happen. Instead, we want everything to work as normal as we want, right? And we don't want any sort of data to be lost, right? So then we do authentication on the client side. Now, um, by when we say client based authentication is because is that our all our logic related to the authentication will run on the or will be present on the client side, and there is no involvement of server here. Similarly, when we say, for example, server based authentication, right? Here, the some part of our code will be based on a server, or authentication will be based on a server, right? So hence it is, or the authentication logic will occur on the server. Hence it is called a server based authentication. Now, for example, one kind of authentication is something called as two-factor, right? Now, these days you have multiple websites being which support this two-factor authentication process, right? Now, the job is basically what it does is, even if an imperson get access to your password and your username, so this two-factor authentication, what it does is, it makes us or it makes sure that even though the imposter has access to your password and your user ID, it will send a notification on your registered device. And if suppose that if you don't accept that message, or if you don't input it in that code, what it will think is that an imposter has attacked, and it will try to get your server, or it will say that unauthorized access, and then it will block the access. So even if the user or the user's password or some important information like username is lost, still because of this two-factor authentication mechanism being present, the data is still not lost. So this is why we need authentication on the client side, on the client side, right? And there are various other reasons as well. Like there are various other possible attacks that can occur on the client side as well. Well, right now, okay. So HTTP was a very old protocol that was being set up, and later on we modified it to HTTPS, right? Now the goal or the advantage of doing this from HTTP to HTTPS is basically the additional S in the HTTP is nothing but called is for security, right? By doing this, what we have done is we have added an additional layer of security to our HTTP request. That means in HTTPS there is some sort of security mechanism already being implemented. Now, why do we? So you might say, instead of using like other technologies, why don't we do the authentication in the HTTP request as well, right? As all well, right? Okay. So now let's study a little bit more about this authentication, right? Now, authentication. Now, actually, this was basically an age-old field in technology, right? From the time where there has been the existence of multiple user computing systems, we have been careful in protecting the distinctions of work. For example, yeah, for even when you are working in a corporate, right? You have given your username and ID to access the system, right? The goal of this is basically to implement security, right? To add some sort of security to your device. Now the second story is basically again, okay, now credentials and access tokens. Now okay, so the first thing that we said, that why can't we do authentication over HTTP, right? So now in RFC is basically it's a IEEE standard, right? So there is it defines a protocol for HTTP. Now, it defines an authentication protocol for HTTP. Now, it provides a challenge response architecture for authentication for client and server. The architecture is an proxy aware and can be additionally used to authenticate HTTP servers. So basically, how um, So in the HTTP request as well, we can do this authentication, right? There is no need for us to use some third party technologies, right? For example, there is single sign on, there is JW2 tokens or SAML or something else, right? The reason or the disadvantage of doing HTTP based authentication is now this authentication requires what it will do is the server will have to manually check all the authentication parameters, right? That means, for example, if you are trying to if this is a website, so let's assume that this is a okay. If we say that so like if we say, if we assume that okay, let's zoom in 200. Okay, so now if we say that this is our website, right? So for example, this is let's say uh, google.com. Now what is going to happen is, what if the moment, or for example, this is Gmail, right? The moment we try to log in, or the moment we'll try to log in here, it will give us an uh, dialog box saying enter your username and password, right? Now if we, now this is basically HTTP based authentication, right? Because we are going to send our password and username in the HTTP request itself. What is the disadvantage of this type of authentication is, basically what is going to happen is the server has to check each of these. Like for example, if there is another client which is going to um, um, uh, have this same dialog box, like response and like username and password, now the server is again going to check the credentials on this as well. So by doing this, what is going to happen is we are going to increase the server checking time, right? So because of this, the server will check the data, right? So this is not a very good practical design, right? Because the server has to spend some time for authentication as well as and it has to, as well as other uh, important features, as well as like serving with the request also has to be done by the server. So basically we are wasting some important valuable resource of the server, right? Which is not a very good approach when we come to authentication, right? So instead of using the server, what we do is we kind of use some third party libraries that kind of do this authentication without the need for the server, right? So hence we are not only reducing the load on the server, instead we are making the server to only perform some important or to, maybe are making the server only to do the job that it is built for, that is to serve the request, right? Instead of the serving checking for authentication as well, now the server is only doing the purpose of serving the request. This is not a very good mechanism, right? So hence there is an increased load, right? So hence we do not use these type of authentication, right? Instead we will use some other methods like and or like some token based authentication like JWT or OAuth, which will provide more security, and it will also provide us more with flexibility as well. Okay, so that's all for a general introduction to authentication. Now we'll study like what is asymmetric encryption and asymmetric decryption, and we'll see that in the next one. Till that time, take care. Bye bye.